Batch invoicing lets you send the same invoice to multiple customers instead of creating a separate invoice for each customer. For example, a workout club might send out monthly invoices for membership dues to several customers. Batch invoicing makes it easier to invoice the customers as a group. As an alternative to batch invoicing, you could create a boilerplate invoice to reuse with several customers. In QuickBooks, that's called memorizing an invoice. And this video shows you how to create a batch invoice and how to memorize an invoice. To follow along, open the working file called landworks_invoices if it's not already open. But before we go on, I want to mention a couple of caveats. If you use multiple currencies, you can't do batch invoices, and you can't set price levels on batch invoices. But other than that, let's move on. Let's say in this sample company that several customers purchase the landscape maintenance service and the invoices are identical. So we'll create a batch invoice. Go to the Customers menu and choose Create Batch Invoices. Before creating batch invoices, make sure you've set up the payment terms, sales tax rate, and preferred method for sending invoices for each customer you want to include in the batch. So go ahead and click OK at this message. So to add a customer to this group of batch invoices, select the customer and click Add, and repeat until you have all the customers you want. But there's an alternative, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these customers and create a billing group. So go to the Billing Group menu and choose Add New. For the name, I'll type Maintenance and click Save. And I'll select the customers I want to add. Scott, you could also double-click the customer, and Chester. When you have all the names of the customers in this list, click Save Group. Now we can go on, so click Next. Check the date in the Date field and make sure it shows the date that you want to display on the invoice. And to add an item to the invoice, click in the Item column, and we'll choose Landscape Maintenance. This group of customers all signed up for 8 hours a month, so I'll type 8 in the quantity. And I'll assign a class, which will be Garden Maintenance. I'll also add a customer message. Let's see, thank you for your business. And click Next. Review the list of customers in the list, and if you want to remove one, just remove the check mark. But let's put Chester back in there. When you're ready, click Create Invoices. In the Batch Invoice Summary window, QuickBooks lists those invoices marked as print, email, or unmarked. And these options are determined by the customer's preferred send method. So to print the printed ones right away, just click Print, and likewise with the email, and those would be emailed right away. For the customers with none as their preferred send method, they will show up here as unmarked, and you can print or email later, and I'll show you how to do that next. So go ahead and click Close. So if the customer's preferred send method is none, you need to open the invoice and send it from the invoice. And I'll quickly show you how to do that. I'll click Create Invoices and click the back arrow until you find the invoice. And for this one, you can see that these boxes are not selected, so you know that this is the one that had none as the preferred send method. So you could either print the invoice right away, right now, or you could email it right now, or you could print later or email later. So I'm going to say print later, and it'll put it in the printing queue. Click Save and Close. So when you're ready to print, go to the File menu, Print Forms, and then choose Invoices. Here you can see that Scott's invoice is now in the printing queue. And to print all these invoices, you would click OK. But for now, I'll just click Cancel. So let's go on to memorizing an invoice. A boilerplate or recurring invoice is an invoice that you issue frequently. For example, A common service provided by this company is installing fountains, and the invoices for this job include the same items. So instead of recreating the invoice each time, you can have QuickBooks memorize the invoice. So you can use a memorized invoice instead of batch invoicing if you need to apply price levels, if you are using multiple currencies, or if you need to vary the quantities of the items. So we'll start by creating an invoice. And since this is an invoice that I'm going to memorize, I'm going to leave the invoice header blank. QuickBooks will fill that in when you're ready to actually use the memorized invoice. So all I need to do is add an item to the line item area, and in this case, fountain installation. And generally the quantity is about 10 hours, so I'll type 10. And I'll assign a class fountain installation. The second item I want to include is the fountain kit. And for the quantity of the kit, I'll enter 1. Okay, so far, that's all I want to add to this memorized invoice, so I'll click Memorize. So I'll give the memorized invoice a name, and I will call it Fountains. And I do not want to be reminded. These other choices I will go over in the lab later in this chapter. So click OK. And since I'm not going to save this invoice, I was just using it to memorize it, I'll click Clear and then close it. So when you're ready to use the memorized invoice, go to the List menu, choose Memorize Transaction List, and double-click to use it. You could enter the customer's name. And QuickBooks is showing this message because when we created the memorized invoice, we did not have a customer, and so QuickBooks didn't have the tax information. So now that we're switching customers, QuickBooks is just warning you that the tax codes and tax information has changed. So click OK. And if necessary, you could change the quantity here for the number of hours or how many fountain setups they used. And when you're ready, you would just click Save and Close. But I don't really want to save this, so I'm going to close it. And I don't want to record it now. There's yet another alternative. So I'll close this and open Create Invoices. And I'm going to search for the invoice that I want to duplicate. You can duplicate an invoice, which could be handy if you invoice the same customer multiple times for the same items. When duplicating, the information on the invoice is identical except for the invoice number. So I'm going to continue to look for the invoice I want. This is the one. And to duplicate it, go to the Edit menu and choose Duplicate Invoice. And QuickBooks is telling you it's been duplicated and you can make any changes and then save the invoice. It's also suggesting that you use memorized invoices instead. So just click OK. And I'm going to close this. I don't really want to create another invoice, so no. So I showed you how to create a batch of invoices, how to create a boilerplate invoice, and how to duplicate an invoice. You can't say QuickBooks doesn't offer options.